Music honestly, there are 7 people I have never and will never forgive. Not just for one thing, but for a long chain of betrayals. They know exactly who they are, and so do I. George Harrison, the quiet one of the Beatles, is forever remembered by the public for his calm, gentle, and romantic demeanor. But that is only part of the untold story. Harrison's smile and wistful eyes was a list of names he despised. From close bandmates to global music legends, some were mocked for their voices, some accused of using spirituality as a gimmick to dress up their music, and some were once friends who ignored or ridiculed them. So, who exactly made it onto George Harrison's hate list? And the final name, surprisingly, was tied to the infamous white powder of Hollywood's backstage scene. George Harrison was born on February 25, 1943, in Liverpool. Growing up in a working-class family, Harrison inherited his love of music from his mother and soon revealed a natural talent. He left school at 16 to apprentice as an electrician. Later joining the Quarrymen on tour in 1960, no one could have guessed that this trip would lead him to become one of the Fab Four and secure his place in music history. On stage, George Harrison stood out for his serious, focused, and quiet manner, earning the press nickname, the Quiet Beatle. That nickname stuck even more firmly after one incident just days before the Beatles' appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. Harrison came down with a severe throat infection. The actor ordered complete silence until the performance. That night was not only a legendary debut, but also the beginning of a quiet image that haunted him for his entire career. But quiet didn't mean submissive on tours. George's reserved personality clashed with the louder, more dominant energy of the other members, and it was there that simmering tensions began. Even as he matured as a songwriter, Harrison was still allowed only 2 or 3 songs per album. The media almost entirely overlooked him. Each time one of his songs was cut or relegated to the B-side, the disappointment deepened. The sense of being undervalued came not only from within the band, but from how the music industry treated him. Over time, these wounds accumulated into deep resentment, eventually hardening into decades-long grudges. 1. Elvis Presley, the shattering of a childhood idol. In early 1950s, a seemingly random moment would shape the life of young George Harrison. While riding his bike past a house, he heard the sound of Elvis Presley's Heartbreak Hotel. Just a few notes. But it was like a flash of light in the mind of the Liverpool teenager. From that moment on, rock and roll wasn't just music, it was the pulse in his veins. Harrison later recalled, "When I first heard Elvis, I knew I was never going to be the same again." Throughout his youth, alongside the other Beatles, Harrison was deeply influenced by Elvis Presley. The image of the young man with the guitar, raw vocals, and a rebellious swagger became for him the embodiment of music that could change a life. But more than a decade later, in the 1970s, when Harrison finally met his idol, that image began to crumble. Instead of the free-spirited Elvis of old, he saw a man in a glittering white jumpsuit, surrounded by female backup singers and blaring trumpets. Everything wrapped in the glitz of the Las Vegas stage. After the meeting, Harrison sighed 2 friends. "I just wanted to tell him, put on some jeans, a black shirt, drop the backup singers and the trumpets, and go play. That's all right, mama, like you used to." According to a member of the entourage, that remark reached Elvis. He was said to have given a cold smile and muttered to someone nearby, "If he thinks I'm going back to playing in little bars just to please somebody, then he doesn't know a thing about Elvis Presley." From that moment, a distance grew between Harrison and Elvis. For Harrison, it was regret for a purity that had vanished. For Elvis, it was irritation at being criticized by a young English kid while still ruling the Las Vegas stage. But Elvis was not the only blow to Harrison's ideals. Within the Beatles themselves, someone who had once been a kindred spirit became a creative rival. Yatu McCartney, from brother-in-arms to rival in the Beatles. In the Fab Four, George Harrison and Paul McCartney were the first to find each other. At first, they were just 2 boys riding the same bus, bonding over a shared love of music. They'd sit together, pass the guitar back and forth, work out chords, and practice until their fingers were raw. McCartney affectionately called Harrison his kid brother. But that brotherhood was soon tested and fractured under the glare of the spotlight they had built together. By 1967, with the release of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club, Band hailed Raz on a masterpiece. McCartney's dominant creative imprint was clear. From then on, Paul began asserting near-total leadership, pushing Harrison's contributions to the margins. Before 1969, Harrison constantly struggled to be recognized as an equal to McCartney. His songs were often pushed aside, leading to deep frustration in a songwriter who craved creative freedom. The tension peaked during the Abbey Road sessions in 1969. Harrison fought to defend his work, rejecting McCartney's suggested changes. The situation grew so heated that McCartney later admitted, "The trouble is, I always thought our songs were better than George's, but now his are at least as good as ours." Harrison shot back bluntly, "I'd rather have Willie Weeks play bass than Paul McCartney. That's the truth. I respect Paul. He's a great bass player, but sometimes he's just too overpowering. I'd join a band with John Lennon when Darley Day, but not with Paul. It's not personal. It's about musical direction." In 1974, speaking to BBE Radio, Harisson put it even more sharply. Paul has ruined me as a guitar player. Yet, despite their spats, Harisson admitted there was a strange bond between them. I just know that no matter what we've been through, there's always something that ties us together. McCartney and Harisson could still wear the old brotherhood mask. But with another Beatle, things became far more bitter. 3. John Lennon from idol to thorn in the side. While the public was captivated by the rivalry between Lennon and McCartney, there was another quieter battle simmering beneath the surface between George Harrison and John Lennon. Their connection began early before the Beatles found fame. George once admired Lennon's wit and creative brilliance, but that admiration was gradually eroded by Lennon's towering presence and dismissive attitude. As the band grew, the balance of power among the members shifted. Even as Harrison matured as a songwriter, he was often pushed to the sidelines, and Lennon rarely hid his indifference. On one occasion, when George brought in a new demo, Lennon merely shrugged and said, it's fine, but it's not something I'd listen to. By the Beatles' final years, the gap had widened. Lennon openly belittled George's spiritual journey, mocking his devotion to music and Indian mysticism. During one recording session, as George tried to explain the meaning behind a lyric, Lennon cut in, "Don't start telling me about those Indian saints again." George Harrison grew increasingly bitter at Lennon's lack of respect and warmth. Gone were the friendly conversations. Their interactions had become tour and distant. In later interviews, Harrison admitted Lennon could be difficult, even selfish. In his memoir, I, Me, Mine, George almost entirely omitted John's name, a silence heavier than any direct criticism. When asked why, he simply smiled and said, "Some things don't need to be mentioned." And although Harrison mourned Lennon's death, he never tried to sugarcoat the past or hide the wounds that had never healed. But his irritations weren't limited to his Beatles brothers. Outside the band, another famous artist's voice drove him up the wall. 4. Neil Young of was George Harrison couldn't stand. George Harrison was remembered as the quiet Beatle, rarely showing open irritation, but in 1992, in a rare moment, he revealed a sharper, more uncompromising side when discussing a fellow musician during a recording session with Bob Geldof. When asked about Neil Young, Harrison didn't hesitate. "I'm not a Neil Young fan. I hate it. Yeah, I can't stand it." He didn't stop there. He went straight for what he saw as the biggest flaw. "The main thing is his voice. I like a couple of his songs, but I hate that voice worse than mine." Even this wasn't just casual criticism, it was a direct strike at the core of an artist's identity, his voice and performance style. Harrison even mimicked Neil Young's distinctive guitar style right there in the studio. Then sneered, "It's just laughable. He does a solo in the middle of a song, and I look at Eric and say, what's that about?" That same year, fate placed George Harrison and Neil Young on the same stage at the 30th anniversary of Bob Dylan. Dozens of major artists gathered to honor Dylan. But backstage, the atmosphere between Harrison and Young was noticeably cool. George kept his distance, rarely making eye contact for more than a few seconds. Neil Young wasn't oblivious. Music journalists at the time reported that Young had heard about Harrison's disparaging comments. Yet instead of lashing out, Neil simply let it go. In front of the cameras, he still smiled and spoke of the Beatles with unwavering respect. "They changed everything. I'll always be grateful they opened doors for all of us." When asked directly about Harrison's negative remarks, Neil shrugged. "Everyone's entitled to an opinion. I didn't like certain artists when I first heard them either, but time changes how you see things." On stage that night, when it came time to sing together, Neil stood close to George, smiling and singing as if he had never heard a word of criticism. Har.